You're listening to End of the Road in Michigan. Today, we travel back to the spring of 1763, when the waters of the Great Lakes rippled with unrest. The French were gone. The British had claimed the forts, and the indigenous nations who had called this land home for generations, well, they had a different idea. This is the story of Pontiac's rebellion. A moment when the center did not hold, and when the first peoples of the Great Lakes rose, not in rebellion, but in defense of their world. In the aftermath of the French and Indian War, Britain found itself the new landlord of a vast, wild estate. The Ohio Valley, the upper Mississippi, the forested Great Lakes, but they didn't inherit empty land. These woods, rivers, and lakes were home to the Odawa, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, to the Huron-Wendat, Shawnee, and Seneca. To those nations, treaties were sacred. Alliances were honored through gift-giving, shared ceremonies, and respect. But when British officers arrived, they saw native diplomacy as superstition, and gift-giving as unnecessary expense. General Jeffrey Amherst cut it off without understanding its meaning. A gesture meant to build trust was suddenly a source of insult. And when the British marched into the old French forts, they brought more than redcoats. They brought arrogance. Somewhere in the woodlands of what is now Ohio, a Delaware prophet named Neolin, he called himself the Enlightened One, began to speak of a vision. The Creator, he said, was angry. Angry that native peoples had strayed, had taken up alcohol, iron tools, cloth from the English. Angry that the British came with fort walls and dishonest words. He spoke in longhouse gatherings, in winter encampments, in fire circles passed down through generations. The English do not belong here, Neolin warned. We must return to the ways of our ancestors. His vision wasn't just prophecy, it was politics, rooted in land and survival. He became a spark. Return to the old ways, Neolin preached. Reject the English. Drive them from the land. Purify your spirit, and the world will be renewed. On April 27, 1763, a council gathered near Fort Detroit. At a bend in the Ecorse River, beneath the trees, Odawa war chief Diug, known to the British as Pontiac, stood before warriors from many nations. He was not a king, not a general, but in that moment, he was a leader. My brothers, the master of life is displeased. The English mean to destroy us. The time has come to strike. Pontiac's voice carried not just defiance, but grief. His words summoned the memory of lost lands, of broken promises, of ancestors buried along riverbanks now lined with musket towers. To many listening, the war was not a choice. It was destiny. And they did. In early May, Pontiac's warriors encircled Fort Detroit. They came with a plan to gain entry under false peace, then strike. But the British commander, Henry Gladwin, had been warned. He shut the gates. Denied the element of surprise, Pontiac turned to siege. More than 900 warriors from the Odawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Huron nations joined him in a prolonged standoff. They blocked food and water. They harassed sentries, intercepted messages, and waited, patient as wolves in the woods. Across the region, other forts fell like dominoes. Fort Sandusky, Fort St. Joseph, Michilimackinac, where a lacrosse game turned deadly. The Ojibwe warriors played, lost the ball through the gates, rushed inside, and took the fort. British garrisons were killed or captured. Their presence was erased. At Fort Pitt, where today Pittsburgh rises, Delaware and Seneca warriors surrounded the fort. Supplies dwindled. Tensions spiked. On June 24, 1763, British officers handed 2 smallpox-infected blankets to visiting native emissaries. General Amherst had suggested the move. Some called it clever. History would call it something else. Biological warfare. The disease spread. Lives were lost. Not just soldiers, but families, villages, communities. It was a cruel silence, the kind that settled over an entire forest. Some villages were wiped out. Others fled. The fear wasn't just of bullets now, it was breath, touch, fever. And all from a gift meant to kill. We will return to our story after this message from our sponsor.
Looking for bold flavors and bolder stories? Spice 2 Vice is where food meets fire, and indulgence meets insight. From smoky barbecue joints to spicy street eats, we serve up culinary cravings and wild lifestyle finds from across the map. Whether you're a flavor chaser or a thrill seeker, Spice 2 Vice dishes out the heat, no filter, all flavor. Spice2Vice.com, where taste gets a little twisted. Visit now and turn up the flavor.
Welcome back. Let's continue with our story. In August, British Colonel Henry Bouquet fought his way through the woods of western Pennsylvania. At Bushy Run, his outnumbered force faked retreat, then turned and struck. The siege of Fort Pitt was lifted. The rebellion had reached its high watermark. Still, Pontiac held on. For 2 years, negotiations ebbed and flowed. Tribes gave ground. The British offered peace. In 1765, Pontiac himself came to Fort Detroit, and there, beneath the shadow of the very fort he had once tried to take, he laid down his arms, but he did not surrender his dignity. He spoke of broken treaties, of futures that still hung in the balance. To those who heard him, there was no weakness in peace, only wisdom. The British, in turn, issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763, drawing a line down the Appalachians. This land, they said, west of the mountains, shall remain for the Indians. It was a promise. It would not last. Pontiac's war didn't end in surrender. It ended in a stalemate. In a treaty forged not from conquest, but from necessity. The British learned to negotiate. The tribes forced recognition. For a brief moment, the land breathed. And then, the tide rolled in again. Pontiac would not live to see what came next. In 1769, 4 years after the last council fires burned down, he was assassinated on the banks of the Mississippi River in Cahokia, a French village just east of today's St. Louis. The man who killed him was a Peoria warrior, said to be acting on orders from tribal rivals who feared Pontiac's growing influence. British officials, including those who had once called for his death, denied involvement, but whispers said otherwise. When word of his killing spread, a different kind of war followed. Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi warriors, brothers in arms from the rebellion, took up vengeance. The Peoria suffered brutal retaliation, nearly wiped out in the years that followed. In the months after Pontiac's assassination, the blood of one man became the catalyst for another reckoning. Far to the southwest, in the territory that would one day be Illinois, a story unfolded that would pass into legend, and give a lonely bluff its name. They call it Starved Rock, a sandstone butte rising 125 feet above the Illinois River, a place of natural strength and terrible memory. In 1769, a band of Illinois Indians, descendants of the Kaskaskia and Cahokia, fled to the summit of that rock. According to the stories passed down, they were being pursued by warriors of the Odawa and Potawatomi. Bent on revenge for the murder of Chief Pontiac, the Illinois had nowhere else to run. The high ground offered brief protection, but no salvation. The Odawa and Potawatomi surrounded the butte. No escape, no food, no water. The siege began. Days passed, then weeks. Under the sun, withering winds, and empty skies, the Illinois withered too. One by one, they died. Not by war clubs, not by musket balls, but by hunger. And so the name, Starved Rock. No treaty records it, no British officer witnessed it, but the legend lives in the telling, in the silence of the forest trails, in the way the rock catches the light at dusk. Today, Starved Rock is a state park. Visitors hike the cliffs and picnic beneath the trees. Few know the story. Fewer still speak it aloud. Where Chef Pontiac is buried, no one can say for sure. Some believe his body lies unmarked beneath the soil of St. Louis, Missouri. Others say he was brought north, secretly, reverently, to Michigan, buried on Apple Island in Orchard Lake in Oakland County, where he spent time as a youth, or along the Lake Huron shore, his grave protected by generations who never forgot. In this country, history often forgets the battles not won, but Pontiac's influence in bringing together different tribes to restore their world in the Great Lakes is not forgotten. Nor were the words of Neolin, echoing still among his people, "Return to who you are." For End of the Road in Michigan, thanks for listening. If you like this kind of story, please let us know. We appreciate your comments. Have a great day.